back, everybody, to the show. Another exciting local Las Vegas podcast. I'm here with Brandon Davis, who I met recently at the Andrew Yang event that we held. If you've been listening to the podcast, you've already listened to that episode. Met a lot of amazing political candidates out there, a lot of Las Vegas locals who share the same vision that I have been expressing on this show for many years now. Brandon is an entrepreneur, and he is running for governor under the Libertarian Party. We haven't had any Libertarian guests on this show, and honestly, I don't think I've met any Libertarian candidates in Las Vegas before. So we're breaking a lot of firsts within the show. Brandon is also the CEO of his own marketing company, and he has a pretty rich history. If you go on his website, which is linked below, you can read even more about that is not expressed through this conversation. So Brandon, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Incredible times. When Andrew Yang introduced me to you, or he brought you up many times during our conversation, I was like, who is this Brandon guy that is sitting across the room that Yang keeps like pointing at? And then turns out you're running for governor under the Libertarian Party. And then as I began to have conversations with you and discuss more about your history, I realized that all three of us share a lot of the same ideals. We believe that the entrepreneur is going to be the future politician. We want nonpartisanship. We believe that a lot of the world lives in the moderate ground or the middle ground. And also we're both very big fans of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin is actually inherently libertarian to begin with. So a lot of similarities, but to just make this very simple, just give us a quick bio of who Brandon Davis is, and then we'll dive a little bit more into some of the more ideological and philosophical stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in Las Vegas for 10 years. I spent a large part of my life living in a van with a bunch of smelly other dudes playing rock music across the country, and was very fortunate to live that lifestyle. And so I've got a very rich background in music and kind of that whole world. I'm a father. I've got two beautiful little kids, a husband, a beautiful wife. As you said, entrepreneur. I've got a marketing and advertising agency called MNGR, and I'm part owner in a few other small businesses here in Southern Nevada as well. So always looking for different ways to expand the portfolio and find ways to grow there. I'm the elections committee director for the Libertarian Party of Nevada, which means that I go out and I find candidates that are willing to run with the party, provide them with training and resources to be successful, and then kind of help them through the process along the way. And then always making sure that we're maintaining ballot access, which we can talk about in the partisanship thing later, and how difficult that can be as well. But there's a lot of things that I've got going on. But the big thing right now is obviously I'm the candidate for governor in the state of Nevada. So a little bit about me. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And it's quite a feat to take on within politics. We know the incumbent wins, I believe, over 90% of the time. So it's going to be quite a mission. You are in a small bucket in Vegas who has now participated in multiple levels of the economy. You're a musician, which Vegas is built on the entertainment industry. You're an entrepreneur, you're a founder of your own company, and also a partner in other small businesses. And now you're moving into the political race and the political realm. Mm-hmm. Are there any similarities you see between all three of these different industries in Las Vegas?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and just in general, I mean, not just in Las Vegas, but, it's really just about brand reach, brand awareness, right? And that's such a big thing, especially like yourself, a content creator, exposing your brand, exposing your reach, whether it's in marketing or it's in the band music industry side of things, it's about getting eyeballs or ears on your product. Same thing with politics, right? And campaigning in general. Is to reach the most amount of people with your message or with your product or, whatever it is that you have. So, I mean, there's a ton of similarities, but I think at the end of the day, another way that they're all kind of connected is that you have to listen to people, right? I think in the music industry, listening to whether it's what people are listening to or what's popular or the way that they're consuming media, right? I think has been a big thing. And so you're always kind of listening, right? Marketing and advertising businesses, you're listening to your customers, you're listening to your clients, right? And figuring out different ways to move and to pivot. And the same thing with politics. I mean, you have to listen to what the people care about. And I think a lot of politicians now get lost on that fact that, you know, it's about what they see and what they think, and it's not. It's about what the constituents, what the people in your district or in your state, in your city, wherever it is that you're campaigning, you have to listen to them and ask them the questions and then build your platform around that.
The detachment from your constituents is, it's highly publicized, and it's caused a lot of discontent within different communities. But then these politicians who are expressed by their constituents that they're not abiding by what they were promised still get reelected. I don't really understand it. We know that politics are kind of gamed in a sense, but we're trying to make it more fair. That's what Andrew's trying to do with the Forward Party. Libertarian Party is no government or very less government, bare minimums. Let's dive a little bit into libertarianism. Mm-hmm. We know that in Nevada specifically, we have closed primaries. I'm not sure if the Libertarian Party partakes in that as well, but it's been a purple state of just Republicans, Democrats kind of going back and forth every 2 to 3 election cycles. I'm not sure if we've had any libertarian leaders, but tell us a little bit about what are the ideals of the Libertarian Party, and is it expressed a bit differently in Nevada?
You know, Nevada is a very purple state. Like a lot of people have said that, where obviously nationally we're known as a swing state for a reason, because it does go back and forth. So, you know, in by purple, you know, that you've got a lot of people on the left, a lot of people on the right. It goes back and forth. I mean, libertarianism, there's a couple of different ways. There's big L's and small L's, and a lot of people don't know the difference between that unless you're kind of in the libertarian space. But a big L is just somebody who is registered as a libertarian. They vote as a libertarian. Now, you can have somebody that's not registered as a libertarian voter, but has libertarian philosophies, right? So there's a philosophy, you know, kind of a place there. And at its core, I mean, I think it's really just don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, right? I mean, that's the simplest way that you can boil it down. You know, I personally, you know, kind of look at it, and I operate through everything, whether it's through policy or just, you know, things in my life or how I engage with other human beings. Is it, you know, cooperation or is it coercion, right? And we see a lot of government being more coercion, whereas, you know, we think that there should be more cooperation. There should be more voluntary choices, you know, voluntary movement forward. So I guess that's the simplest way that you can break it down. I mean, other people have described the big L, you know, kind of side of things to be fiscally responsible and socially liberal, right? Whereas it's, hey, let's look at how much taxes we're taking from taxpayers. Let's reduce that. Let's reduce the amount of government overreach or regulations or spending or programs. And also, on the other side, allow them to live their lives, right? Let them, you know, choose who they want to marry or what they want to do with their bodies, or, you know, things of that sort. So that's kind of an easy way to kind of digest what libertarians think. But I could go on. I mean, you know, we want to end all wars, period. You know, we have a very large non-interventionist, you know, foreign policy, you know, different things that you can get more technical if you want, but at its core, that's kind of the base. As far as the party itself, I mean, it's the third largest party in the United States. And the Democrats and Republicans have worked very hard to make sure that we don't have a seat at the table. And it's not just us, the Green Party, there's other parties out there. I mean, Andrew is experiencing the same with the Forward Party. I remember seeing some quotes from him when he decided to leave the Democratic Party and start his own. He was like, wow, this is really tough. Like, you know, they've literally created, you know, a system that makes it so difficult for anybody else to, and that's the one time the Democrats and Republicans work together, right, is to keep anybody else out. I mean, they've owned the Commission on Public Debates since, I want to say, I don't know if it was the 80s or 90s, but it was privately run up until a certain point, and then it was bought, and now apparently the Republicans are out of that even. But so As far as the Libertarian Party itself, there's over 350 elected officials across the country. We've had a sitting congressman in Justin Amash. We've had Marshall Burt, who's a current assemblyman in Wyoming. We've got, plenty of, local, smaller things across the country. But, here in the state, we've got the largest slate of Libertarian candidates in 40 years in Nevada. So we've done some really special things this election cycle, and we're working really hard to make sure that we can get a Libertarian elected this year to get, into the conversation, right? One of the biggest things that people talk about is, we definitely lean Libertarian, but they can't win. So we vote with one of the two major parties. We've got to show them that we can win. Once we win, then we can have the conversation of if not when, right? So that's kind of where we're at. And we're really excited about what we're going to see this year.
Well, that's pretty incredible to see. When I think about the political spectrum, I've seen this graph a handful of times. On the x-axis, you have Republicans on the right, Democrats on the left, and then they add a y-axis, and on the top it's authoritarianism, and then at the bottom's libertarianism, and then everyone kind of falls in this axis somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Right. You want people to really do things that they want, and unfortunately the x-axis tries to bring everything full center and kind of eliminate that y-axis. So there's 350 libertarian politicians across the country, but both the Republicans and Democrats have such a stranglehold on all of the industries that surround it, between media, voting process, et cetera. How do they end up finding office? Is it just through a grassroots movement locally? Is it some sort of unification behind the party that decides to put all the resources into one specific area? Because I know there's probably it's not just a glass ceiling that's there. It's probably a steel ceiling that they kind of have to bury through to get to be elected. Yeah, for sure. No, they make it very difficult. So every state's different, right? They've all got different rules. So for example, Andrew is pretty close with Larry Sharp. So Larry Sharp is running for governor in the state of New York, right? That state particular, he had to generate 50,000 signatures just to get on the ballot. So they had to go out and get 50,000 wet signatures. So very similar to what the Ranked Choice Voting Initiative is doing here in the state of Nevada. They had, Larry had to, and so there's some other states that are very similar. Some I've seen as high as 200,000 signatures, 250,000. And so those laws are on the books. And so the national party will put resources behind those specific ones where they need that help, right? So they'll put, funding to be able to hire volunteers to go collect those signatures. And so those are important. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have states like Colorado and Nevada that just literally, as long as you're nominated at a convention, you're on the ballot, right? And we don't participate in primaries, to your earlier question. So that's good, right? As in we get to go direct to the general, but we get left out of the conversation because everything is so primary heavy right now. And then by the time the elections come over, everyone has no idea who's on the ballot. They just know Republicans and Democrats. And they're like, who are these libertarians that are on this ballot? Yeah, and I'm still getting, I don't mean to cut you off, I'm still getting, messages and emails from people that are like, hey man, I don't see your name on the ballot. What's going on? And I have to explain to them, hey, this is a closed primary system. So there's a ton of voters in this state, and I'm sure nationwide, depending on their election rules in their individual state, but that understand that it's time to vote, but don't really understand kind of that process. So I think education is key in all things. So why governor? We know Sisolak's been the governor now for one term. He's definitely on his heels because of the closure of the Strip. A lot of people had a lot of not nice things to say about him. Both parties have been actually pretty critical of him over the time. Is it a direct competition against Sisolak? Is it more, do you see something specific that Sisolak hasn't enacted over Nevada that needs more attention? Tell us a little bit about why governor over maybe something like mayor or Congress. Yeah, absolutely. I remember sitting in my kitchen with my wife in 2020. Well, it wasn't my wife at the time, but Congrats.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah. We just got married back in November. Kind of watching the February, March 2020 thing kind of unfold, kind of like everybody else was. And, I've kind of been kind of not necessarily involved in politics as far as like activism, but, following along and just being a knowledgeable voter, right? And knowing the system and so on and so forth. But, when it came to emergency declarations, I had no idea kind of what that meant or how it could be used. And as I saw kind of the thing start to unfold, it was just highly concerning, right? That we could use loopholes like that in our system to be able to, regulate down to such a level to be able to, close businesses to, and some of these businesses are generational, right? We want to talk about lower socioeconomic people or, people of color. Some of these businesses were handed down to them, through generations and immediately gone, the schools, I could go on, but to me, I just thought it was an atrocity. And the fact that people weren't allowed to choose for themselves, right? I thought was awful. So that's kind of what started that whole ball for me. And then once, just doing more digging and learning and research, just seeing, time after time, I knew, our state's in a housing crisis. Our state has, justice issues. There's so many things that I could go on about that haven't been addressed. And I think a leader for this state really needs to address the issues in this state. And I just haven't seen leadership from Governor Sisolak to this point. I've seen a lot of pandering. I've seen a lot of bending knees to special interest groups and, unions, and I could go on there. But, for me, I just think the state deserves better. It's a beautiful place. I love being here. My children are born here. I'm invested in my community. I'm invested in the state and my people. And I just think they deserve better.
So what would a libertarian governor look like? Have we historically throughout the party, are there, looking across the country, are there currently any libertarian governors? Or if there isn't currently, who was the last one? And if you had to summarize it, what did that look like for the state?
Yeah, I mean, there has been in the past. So Gary Johnson was the governor of New Mexico, and he was actually the Libertarian Party's presidential candidate in 2016 and 2012. And so, yeah, he was a Libertarian governor. Some say that Polis, the governor of Colorado, is very Libertarian leaning. I mean, he's one of those that he says some things that I'm like, yeah, I'm on board with that, for sure.
He's also a big supporter of Ethereum.
Yes.
He attends all the ETH Denver conferences for the last 5-6 years. Yeah, very, very libertarian ideals. Maybe that's from his tech and crypto background, or if he's even believed in that longer. And we see it as kind of easier once you get in to then see what the rotting is on the inside, to then take your own ideals and apply that even within a Democratic Party.
Yeah, for sure. No, he's he definitely has libertarian leanings. Whether or not he categorizes himself as or thinks of himself as a libertarian philosophical individual, I don't know, but he's probably one that Reason talks a lot about. So yeah, I mean, as far as what it would look like, I think it would look like, a great benefit for this state. I think, we haven't seen immense growth in innovation outside of the gaming and tourism, and that killed us in the pandemic. I mean, we saw the highest unemployment rate in the entire nation because we weren't divested or diversified, I should say, in our portfolio. And I think, doing that is incredibly important. And I think being able to scale back some of the wasteful spending to scale back some and really take a hard look. There's nowhere that I can find that there is any quantifiable key performance indicators, analytics, or data behind most of the programs that we're spending these millions of dollars on, right? So do we know they work? Nobody knows. There's no reports. There's no anything. There's no accountability there. So I think having somebody that is super fiscally responsible like that is going to go in and say, listen, we have to scale some of this stuff back. If you can't prove that it's actually benefiting the state it's got to go, right? And finding different ways. Then we've got, a budget surplus, and then we're able to kind of look at, community organizations and to be able to funnel that money back to the people, right? So I think that's definitely one thing that would look like. Then also, Nevadans would always have their rights to choose what they do with their bodies. They would always have rights to be able to choose who they marry. Then none of those stuff, none of those items underneath my watch would ever, we're very fortunate right now, obviously, with, marijuana legalization, with, the right to choose. We're very fortunate. Some of that stuff is either, statutory or
It's not completely there, though. It's not completely there in terms of the rights debate. So 2 points I want to touch on. First, with wasteful spending. When the pandemic first started, and I started this podcast, I had this woman on named Meredith Spriggs. Very early episode. She runs a homeless outreach agency down here in downtown Las Vegas. And she said that the Las Vegas government spent multiple millions of dollars to create this homeless shelter, which was basically just like a covering in a parking lot. It cost them, I believe, $1 to $2 million, and it only slept 26 homeless people around that for the whole time. And so she talks about how there needs to be a private and public combination or some sort of consortium on these kind of projects, because as we know, entrepreneurs and capitalists are great at optimizing, but they're not good at sharing the pie as much. And then the government tends to share the pie, but they're not good at optimizing and being efficient. So there needs to be some sort of collaboration. That's why I'm very big on entrepreneurs becoming politicians. And then the second point that I was going to say, which I'm kind of spacing on at the moment, was that Vegas is in this, it's in this weird predicament within innovation. The Strip, and this is what I was going to say. The Strip, as you mentioned, is innovating, but now it's turned into this like type of corporatism where it's not necessarily innovating, and now it's beginning to siphon funds away for no good reason. We see posts on numerous resort fees, parking fees, and now there's gift shop surplus fees, but they're not really introducing too much yet. And so a lot of the tourists have begun to migrate down to downtown. It's cheaper, and they're doing more experimentation when it comes to hospitality. Yes, it's not as glamorous, but time and time again, I hear about how much more fun it is to be downtown. Yeah. And this kind of corporatism pushes a lot of the locals off the Strip because they start slashing bottom lines, and they're automating service bartenders away, and eventually they're coming for the front desk workers. And so where are all these people going to go when the Strip becomes like the most efficient capitalistic model to begin with? I've had multiple conversations with the city of Las Vegas about, and the UNLV and all the different governing bodies, about just having the politicians tweet and publicly say that they're interested in innovation, right? Whether it's blockchain technology, bringing VCs down Silicon Valley, and they don't even have to say things of like, we're going to shape everything to your benefit, but to just show an interest that you will support these new and fast growing industries in Las Vegas. That's something that we need. And I think I'm almost to the point now where I don't think a career politician could get this done because they're just so detached from constituents, like you've mentioned earlier. Yeah, for sure. And the question is, I have this conversation a lot, is let's define support, right? Because we want that. But I think there's been such over, the previous years, decades, whatever, that how we bring in, the Teslas and the Googles and the Amazons, the big, kind of sector stuff like that, is by giving them tax credits and government handouts. And it's like, how do we need to be able to bring those people in to Las Vegas, into the state of Nevada, without those government handouts, right? I think that's the question. So what does that support look like? That's what we need to build, and we need to have the conversation centered around that. But I 100% agree. When I think of support, it would be something in terms of like social support or some sort of like networking support outside of subsidiaries. Vegas specifically, I know you're running for governor of Nevada, but Reno also has a booming tech sector. From what Jeff Sailing has told me, that's the CEO of Startup Nevada. Reno is actually much farther ahead in the tech space. Vegas will eventually come up or catch up just because of the sheer population and now the amount of entrepreneurs who are moving down here. But it seems like both cities are really trying to build this tech scene of some sort. And tech is obviously ambiguous. It can mean a multitude of things. How do you think we would grow the tech sector in Nevada? Is that one of your priorities as a governor, or what industry do you think would be most important to grow the Nevada economy outside of tourism and hospitality?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, one thing that we see, whether it's through GoEd or through, UNLV's, reports that they put out on, kind of economic impact or, outlook, stuff like that. I mean, the jobs that, are needed moving forward are definitely in that tech space, right? So there's more people that are looking for those types of jobs, and there's just not enough companies to, provide that work. So we have to figure out a way to get those people here again without just, huge tax breaks, right? We have to figure out what that is. Obviously being in the marketing and advertising space, kind of in that tech kind of space anyways, and I just personally love tech. I would love to see that growth. I would love to see, Nevada kind of be, or at least whether it's Southern Nevada or Northern Nevada, like a hub, like a Silicon Valley, and innovation and new startups and the VC community up there. So how we do that, I think is the question, and centering the conversation around that. I mean, Nevada's no state income tax. The weather is beautiful. I mean, there's lots of reasons to move a company here. We just have to find ways to nurture that and make sure that they know that they're welcome.
When you look at Las Vegas and you look at Miami, and I make these parallels very often, the difference between why Miami captured $4 billion in VC dollars over a year-over-year return, and why Vegas didn't, is because of the social support, because of Mayor Suarez coming out and saying, hey, I don't know much about blockchain. I've participated in it personally, but I want Miami to be a home for tech and blockchain entrepreneurs and technologies, and basically saying, I don't know how I'm going to do it immediately, but if you come down here, I'll have a conversation with you and provide social support so that we can make sure we're on the same track, and then set up guidelines together. I just don't understand why a lot of politicians from the local government standpoint, whether it's Vegas, Reno, or anything outside of that, why they're so against it, or why they're so privy to not express enthusiasm around something that can potentially revolutionize their local economies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have the answer for that. I know I personally would be. I think a big issue is definitely the housing side of things, right? Over 90% of the state is owned by the federal government, so that's tough. We have, land issues, and hopefully that can be a conversation moving forward on how we expand on that. But that being said, we got to figure out a way to create more supply of housing, right? Whether it's through, alternative housing, looking at local zoning regulations to be able to allow for multi-use types of environments to build vertically, tiny homes, alternative different options. I mean, we've got to figure that out, because I think that that's probably one of those things that makes it difficult for large companies to come here to bring that infrastructure, because the housing side of things is very difficult and it's very expensive. I mean, housing is expensive across the U.S., but, that can be very difficult. So I think that that's something that needs to be addressed as well. But you're right. I mean, the social support is incredibly important, and having those conversations and getting those things to happen. I mean, the blockchain, LLC thing up in Northern Nevada was an interesting kind of situation to watch unfold. And, I think that it was too much, too fast with not enough infrastructure. So we'll see if that kind of comes back around and rears its ugly head at some point. But I love those ideas, right? I mean, I think it's a forward-thinking, innovative kind of idea, again, that just didn't make sense. But I think, again, having those conversations, bringing up those ideas is the important path forward.
Vegas, I believe, at any point up until the last few months had less than 2,000 houses on inventory for almost an entire year, 2 years since the pandemic started, just to show the lack of supply that's driven by the amount of new residents that have moved down here. One of my friends was saying it was 50 to 100 new residents were moving here every day for like almost 2 years. It's insane. But I do have this belief that with all of the new residents, a lot of them are actually tech based. They're remote workers who work for a handful of different tech based companies, whether it's cybersecurity, social media. When I say tech, it's not always referring to like Google and Facebook. Like most people think it could be any sort of background.
Yeah, software developer for a small firm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, anything. Those entrepreneurs are eventually going to want to build something. They make a nice amount of capital they'll be able to save, and they're going to start looking around the city for opportunities to do what entrepreneurs do and fix problems and optimize existing businesses. So I think we need, and this is why I've been setting up different communities, blockchain meetups and stuff, is that we need to be able to provide support for those entrepreneurs when they do begin to start building and deploying capital across the city. But this also comes down to like a policy standpoint of encouraging them to actually build instead of maybe taking the capital somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would look at, the private sector, in the market to kind of create some of those opportunities. I mean, we've seen, over the last decade, the co-working movement has radically changed things. And I mean, it was positioned perfectly as we ran into the pandemic, because there were, people that were kind of already, doing the community co-working kind of thing. They were, whether it's a dedicated desk or a hot desk or just kind of floating around and being able to move and pivot. But that is a perfect example of how, through capitalism or just the market in general, kind of worked to create a solution to a problem that existed for a lot of startups, for a lot of business owners that said, hey, I want to start this business, but I don't have the capital for a 2-year lease or for, a copy, print, and scan, or for all the different things the overhead that comes with starting a new company or new business that you could launch in this little community-based, kind of co-working type of environment. And so I would look for, again, the private sector to kind of come to the table with, things like that are like game changers to be able to, be an asset to some of these new startups that are wanting to come in.
As an elected governor, would you put more importance or preference, we'll say at least within the first 100 days, on the private sector or the public sector? What do you think needs more attention from a state standpoint?
That's an interesting question, because it kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, I think, let's talk about, businesses, as somebody who has, started businesses from scratch, who has bought existing businesses, who has, kind of been there and done that in the scope of, different municipalities, different licensing types, different permitting types, it's a lot for somebody to come in and start a business. And I think it should be much easier. Occupational licensing reform is a big thing that I'm passionate about. I mean, you've got salon, hairstylists, or, microblading, I could go on, tattooing, all these different, occupational licenses that are really sometimes very lengthy and difficult to get, or expensive at least. So for me, as far as supporting the private sector and supporting, small business, startups, things of that sort, I would look to, again, remove the costs and remove the restrictions and the lengthy time for licensing and all the red tape that comes with businesses either starting from scratch or allowing even larger corporations to come here and get established. So I think, again, that's a little bit of the public and the private, right? Mm-hmm. Working to benefit the private, but also benefiting the public, because, again, we've got to generate more jobs. We've got to generate more revenue. So I think the fastest way to do that is to make it easier for businesses to thrive.
Saw an article a few months ago, I don't know, within the last few unemployment report releases of how this changed, but I believe it was at the beginning of the year, Vegas was still had about 40,000 positions need to be filled. And it was due to people like myself and others who decided, hey, I don't want to work in the hospitality industry anymore. I'm going to take a bet on myself and go do something independent, whether it's creating a business, content creation, investing, being a degen gambler, who really knows. And on the other side of that, I had a recent political candidate, Dr. Erica Smith, who we both know. She was at the Yang event as well. She emphasized the same exact thing that you did as one of her priorities, is cutting out the friction for business creation.
Yeah.
So I think it just shows the tale of two sides, where the entrepreneurs want to, the entrepreneurial based political candidates, they want to cut out that friction because they know how important it is to for value creation is to have job creation. And then when there is value and job creation, then it's employment creation. And it's this catch-22 that is a positive feedback loop. But when you put all of these unneeded costs, I know the government needs to make money, but it's the reason why. And I've also created multiple businesses. By the time you actually have a business, start a small business, you're $10,000, $20,000 in debt due to just like fees and these and maybe 6 months to a year in the approval process to get some of these businesses done. My first business was a antique store, and I didn't realize for about 2 months, no one told me that I actually had to go get an FBI background check for this, because antique stores are one of the most popular jobs for money laundering or industries, which I hadn't realized. But no one really told me, and everyone's kind of just like sitting around staring at each other. So it's just it's quite ironic for this display of entrepreneurs who are getting into politics to want to cut that friction out. I hope it becomes something of the future. But now looking at your lens, you're helping basically for recruiting for the Libertarian Party. You're now running for governor. Do you think entrepreneurs have a future in politics? As somebody yourself, obviously there's a little bit of bias. There's a lot of criticism that's casted on both sides, or you say all four sides, towards career politicians. They seem to never get anything done. When we speculate about maybe the next 10, 20, 30 years in politics, do we think that the share of political seats will be represented by entrepreneurs?
I sure hope so. I mean, one of the beautiful things about entrepreneurs is that, we build, nothing's handed to us, right? We're not just given, things. And I think, talk about, the ability to kind of shift and to move, to be innovative. I mean, those are all things that our government needs, right? For me personally, I think, as limited amount of government as possible is the best path forward for everybody in this country. Because we've seen so many ways that so many things are not working, right? But yet we keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's the definition of insanity. So I think, having more entrepreneurs, again, that are young, smart, able to pivot and to move on a dime and not be stuck into the same old kind of one-track thinking, right? I think is best for us moving forward. And then to understand, is starting a company, starting a business, starting a product, a brand, whatever it is, understanding, needing to hit key performance indicators, right? And what works and what doesn't, and being able to be shifty in that, I think is incredibly important. And if we were to take that and apply it to politics and government in general, I think that things would move much smoother.
There's something that you said, and I think it's quite interesting. As a libertarian, you want as least amount of government as possible, correct? Or some sort of variation of it. We know that Democrats have an issue with bloating the government and excessive spending, but then it causes this fear that a lot of citizens they associate for some reason libertarianism with almost like anarchy and anarchism, right? Because anarchy is just complete elimination of government. It's basically just society acting as themselves. How, if you were elected governor, how would you go about like eliminating the bloating, but still allowing for some sort of like stability in terms of like safety in the public perception? I feel like it's this kind of like teeter-totter balance that you'd have to balance while trying to satisfy those needs.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, listen, change takes time. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? All those cliche, analogies, whatever you want to call them. I think it's got to be a systematic chipping away. It's, again, and there's only so much that a governor can do, right? So let's be frankly honest and realistic about what can and can't be done. But I think, being able to kind of scale back little by little, find what works, what's not working, where we're overspending, and trimming, right? So we're almost like clay, we're molding, right? And I think right now it's just like, let's spend more money on it. Let's create programs, or create solutions to problems that don't exist. I could go on. But I think, having, again, a libertarian in that position or in, elected office period, whether it's in the assembly or the state senates or local municipalities, which is what we're working on, now, is having, a voice for somebody that's like, I don't know if this is working. Let's rethink this. Let's maybe we do this in a different way, or allow the private sector, allow the market to sort this stuff out, right? There's a lot of programs that, people rely on. And I think our government has, over the years, systematically created, heavy reliance on those instead of empowering the individual to rise up or to be strong or to, create their own, destiny. So I think you got to stop it. You got to stop the bleeding at some point. And I think that's where we're at. We need to, look at things as we got to stop the bleeding and then start the patchwork moving forward and finding ways to do things more effectively and to scale things back.
I think it's going to be quite interesting to follow the Nevada budget expenditure over the next few years. As we know, during the shutdown, I think the Nevada government was about $1 billion or $2 billion in debt. And then due to the stimulus package, they received the most stimulus money because it was based off of the amount of, or the highest unemployment rate throughout time. So then they ended up negative a few $1 billion in debt, and then they now are a few $1 billion with a surplus because of that. So that shows and displays kind of the behind the scenes politicking negotiation that happens, and the reason why they kind of encourage some of these things that are very questionable. So that's something that I've actively been watching and trying to understand. But the issue is that maybe I understand it, you understand it. The majority of Nevada doesn't understand it. Nevada is consistently in the bottom tier of public education. Mm-hmm. My entire life, it's been under 48. So it's been 48, 49, or 50 in all states. Looking through a libertarian lens or just through the Brandon Davis lens, how do we combat this issue and increase the public education perception, whether it's changing the entire system outright or maybe some small tweaks? I know this is something that's on your website as well. Yeah. How do we go about this change?
Yeah, I think there's short-term goals and then there's long-term goals. I think let's start with the long-term is that we need to get government out of education, period, right? The Department of Education has been a failure from the start. And I know that's an uncomfortable topic and probably not a popular take on it, but that's just what the data shows us. But in the short term, I think, funding students instead of systems is the path forward, right? Right now we've got all that federal funding and we get money that comes in, but it goes to pay for purse, accounts, right? Retirement accounts for educators or people who've worked in the public education system years ago, decades ago, right? We're still paying towards them while those people come back and work after they've already retired. And so they're really double dipping in their, which is a thing that happens. But I think, we need to allow that funding to follow the student, right? Students are locked into zip codes right now, which is an atrocity. There's no sensible way that anybody can ever explain to me why it's okay that a kid in a specific zip code has to go to that specific school and can't go anywhere else. It's unacceptable. So I think that's the first thing is we have to look at funding the students instead of the systems and allowing that money to follow them. If a kid wants to go outside of their school district, or not school district, but outside of their zip code where they're zoned for, they should be able to, period. I like voucher programs I like education savings accounts, which we used to have until Democrats got rid of that.
What is that?
An education savings account allows money to go into account to allow the money to follow the student. Okay. Right. So if the student wanted to go to a private school, there would be funding there for him. Do
you know what the average treasury account was per student by chance?
No.
Okay.
I mean, right now, I want to say that the state spends about $9,200 per student in the public system, is what they average it out to be, which is gaining more because there was legislation recently, and obviously they got the mining tax. But
so over 12 years seems quite low.
Yeah, it's one of the lowest in the country. But the sad part is that the money that they do spend, again, goes to bloated staffs and admin salaries and purse and benefits. So we have to find some better ways to utilize that money that's coming in and to restructure some of the administration and some of the additional bloat that we have. I'm a big advocate for splitting up the Clark County School District. You know, you look at Colorado or some other states around the country, and you might, like in Denver, I don't know the exact number, so I'm not going to quote it, but it's an immense amount of school districts, right? There's not one school district for an entire city or county. And so I think, you know, restructuring CCSD, possibly Washoe County School District, but the system that we have now where it's one school district per county, I think is pretty archaic. I want to say it was in the 50s when they came up with that. So obviously things have changed a bit in this state. So that needs to be addressed. So I'm a big fan of that and allowing for just more accountability. And I think when you have smaller school districts, they can be run more efficiently. We might see things like smaller classroom sizes where there's more attention to the student. You're going to have better outcomes. You're going to have better safety. So those are some of the ways that I think that we move forward or need to move forward in the public sector. But I'm a huge fan of charter schools, micro schools, privates, you know, just any alternative options. I mean, we're in 2022. There's so many different ways that kids learn now, in so many different, you know, ways, especially through the pandemic that we saw. You know, people were like, how can we do this differently? Our kids have been shut out of their, you know, their public school. How can we create something different? And so we've seen a lot of that. And I think just more innovation is a great thing for education.
As you're talking, I thought of all the different areas within Las Vegas. You could have a Summerlin School District, a Henderson School District, North Vegas, and East Vegas. That just makes it already divided up and can have more focus in the areas that need more educational focus. I grew up in the east side of Las Vegas, which is the lower socioeconomic area, like poverty-stricken area. It's unfortunate, but I remember seeing, I think this was probably a year or two ago, they were going to section off East Las Vegas and have a mayor, just like they do with like Northern Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, it didn't happen. I don't know if it's like that's from some sort of like power dynamic that's attached to that, which I assume probably is. But dividing it at the school district up, I've never thought about, and it seems like it'd be a good cause. But if we did divide that up, if we did divide up the school districts, but also on the other side, and this may not be related, of decreasing the zoning and allowing students to go to any school of their choosing. Do you think that specifically with zoning would increase the inequality? Because all of the students would end up just going to one school, right? If they know that all their friends are there, or if this is the popular academy, how do you prevent that type of inequality from happening?
Yeah, and that's part of the conversation, like the Rory Reeds and, you know, their organization, and a lot of people who are, you know, staunch critics of, you know, the school choice movement, is that how do you keep, you know, let's say a Title I school in this part of the town from not getting this? Again, it's always about funding. That's always the conversation. You know, we can't break it apart because they're going to get more students or more funding over here and not over here, right? So it's definitely a challenge. But, you know, we already support Title I schools, and schools that typically have low achievement rates that already have issues. They already get, you know, immense amount of funding, right? Whereas, you know, Palo or, you know, another school and is using on the other side of the spectrum that they don't get. So, I mean, there's already, not necessarily an imbalance, but there's already a spotlight put on these other schools that are not doing as well, right? So I don't see it would be any different in a scenario where you've got smaller school districts that, again, it's always about key performance indicators, right? What's working and what's not. Mm-hmm. And if, you know, there's a specific school, I think they should get more attention or more funding, right? But as far as keeping or having an issue where kids want to all go to one school. I think that's why where it's going to be important for each individual, school district, right, or the school board to create, positive situations to where a lot of these schools can thrive, right? Then you're not going to have that issue. Right now, I mean, we're looking at it through a dynamic of where we stand now, where you've got these specific schools that, quote unquote, are better than the others. I mean, I'm just hearing about safety issues at Centennial, right? And that's
that's one of the better schools, yeah, quote
correct,
unquote, yeah.
Quote unquote. So, I mean, let's be real about, what, is considered a good school and what's not, and where kids would want to go, and vice versa. So, it's definitely, something to consider and to be part of the conversation, because, you're going to have that situation. But again, allow the market to work itself out.
Free markets, as long as they are free markets. That's what we've always wanted with the public stock market, which has now been captured by special interest groups, hedge funds, politicians, all this fun stuff. But on the other side, as governor, you look over the entire state. Are there any, when it comes to like creating additional value or additional wealth for the state, are there any industries that you'd like to see introduced to Nevada that you would encourage, or is there any sort of proposals that you have that could help Nevada in the form of wealth creation that doesn't already exist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but before I'll go there, I'll say, part of, scaling back and reducing, like let's reduce it. We're going to create, a great amount of wealth through that. But there's several different ways that I think we can expand out. I mean, let's look at what we have, right? So you can't move forward unless you see where we're at.
Right, yes.
And let's look at the cannabis industry as a perfect example. Why can we not get, why have they not figured out consumption lounges, right? Like that was approved to the legislature, and yet the city municipalities just can't figure it out, right? Let's go. What are we waiting on? So there's that. There's the amount of licenses. I mean, in the state of Oklahoma, I want to say there's like 1,200, marijuana licenses that have been distributed. And maybe that's a little bit too much for that size of a state, right? And it creates an oversaturated market. But we've got 52 here in the state of Nevada? Why? So we need to open some things up. We need to allow, again, remove some of the restrictions, remove some of the red tape with allowing some of the existing markets and existing industries that we have in the state to thrive. And one can assume that the reason why we have 50 cannabis licensing is through Backroom Deals, right? A lot of these weed companies are owned by Steve Yeager about that, or Sear Bloom. Right.
The weed companies are owned by the alcohol companies. The alcohol companies work with the casinos, and then it becomes this giant circle that are funding the politicians to keep them in order to keep the protections around those licensings or build those hurdles, right? It's like when you go to cancel an online membership of something or online service, you can't figure out how to cancel the membership. They do that purposely to make it as difficult as possible. Yeah. As a libertarian governor, you'd be fresh. You wouldn't be privy to these types of backroom relationships. But that also puts like a larger hurdle for you to get to office. Have you thought about like this situation? Have you thought about like what that means if there is a fresh person in government that doesn't have to basically bend the knee to these large corporations, and then some of the hurdles that you have to overcome to kind of get there?
Yeah, and I'll just first and foremost, I'm definitely privy to them. I just wrote an article on my website about some shady deals, that went down with basically through the opioid, epidemic. There were, some lawsuits and some law firms that were fighting that, and there were, settlements and payouts. And there was a committee that met in 2017 that, that wasn't documented, and nobody knows what happened, but it was an amendment got added to this bill that, got voted and passed that, dramatically increased the amount of money that the law firms get from the opioid settlements, right? It just so happens that Aaron Ford, our current attorney general, his law firm was one of those law firms, and he's on that committee. So I'm fully aware, and I hear about it all the time, and I document them. So I'm definitely privy to those backroom deals, to those, friendly handouts and things of that sort. I think that shit's got to end. Pardon my French. I don't know if I can swear.
No,
on this podcast,
please.
But,
freedom of expression here. We're libertarian here.
Yeah, there we go. I love it. Yeah, no, it's absolutely atrocious, and I think that's the people. I mean, we've seen just people are pissed about those types of dealings. They need it to end, and they deserve better. I mean, we're paying into a system that allows people to continuously be elected to do shit like that. So that's got to end. I mean, what does it look like? Somebody having, a seat at the table in the state, whether it's in the governor, in the assembly, whatever it is, that doesn't have those, relationships and does not have to bend the knee, I think is the greatest thing that this state could possibly have, period. Right. Work for the people, do what's right by the people, listen to the people. And everything else is going to fall in line, because that's how it should be.
And as a libertarian governor, what would your cabinet look like? What would it be? What would it be comprised of? Is it Republicans and Democrats and libertarians? Is it just libertarians? Is it unpolitically fueled entrepreneurs? Because we've seen the criticism with Trump as president. He says drain the swamp, puts it all with businessmen who are Republicans and certain special interest groups. Then we see when Democrats come on, it's all Dems who just like bend the knee and they follow whatever the party is saying, no matter what, progressive, social good, social causes, etc. But somebody who's not even on the X spectrum, from a primary perspective, what would a libertarian cabinet look like?
Yeah, I think it would be full of people who refuse to bend the knee to special interest groups. I mean, period, right? I think you always, in any situation, want to have the best person for the job, right? Based on qualifications. So, I mean, that's kind of the first that you're always going to look at in any situation, whether it's, a cabinet for, a state, or it's a board of directors for an organization, a nonprofit, whoever it is. You want a person that's going to be qualified for that job. But, for most things, and I would highly encourage all of your viewers, if you're listening to this or you're watching it, Transparent Nevada, go to that website and you can see what everybody makes, right? You can go to the Secretary of State, you can see what political contributions have been made to a specific current legislator or a current politician, or, what political action committees they're spending money on. You can see all of it, right? So for me, I would do a deep dive on who I feel is qualified, and then I would see who they've gotten money from, because at the end of the day, that's who they're going to kowtow to. That's who they're going to answer to, and that's who they're going to work for. So for me, full transparency, finding somebody who is, again, not bought and sold, I think would be really important. But I would want to have, innovators. I would want to have young people. I would want to have, people who are going to have a fresh take on our current environment in the state. And be able to, move in a path forward that is going to, be able to, diversify and to really change things and mix things up in the state.
And as somebody who's not bought and sold, campaigning does come with the mechanism of fundraising, which could be diluted through social pressures. If somebody donates a large amount of money, they encourage you to lean in their favor. But the question is, fundraising as a libertarian or as Brandon Davis, what does that look like? How is that different how does it differentiate itself from raising capital or fundraising from a heavily left-leaning or heavily right-leaning candidate?
Yeah, great question. I think the amount of money in politics is disgusting. I'll just put that out there. Period. I think, I would love to see in coming years, and I would be a fan of, kind of reforming the amount of money that's spent in politics, the amount of money that the PACs and different organizations are able to move. I think that that's a big problem in our current political system. And it's tough as a libertarian to, ask for money, right? But, I say this a lot, to change the game, you have to be a player in it. And to be a player in it, you have to play the game, right? And so, unfortunately, we've got a lot of work to do, and we've got a huge reach. I mean, we've got 1.8 million registered voters in the state, and the way that you impact them is through going on shows like yours and running advertising and signage and doing events and TV and radio and all the different ways that you get the word out about your message through marketing and advertising, and just letting the state of Nevada know that there's another option outside of the duopoly, broken candidates, right? So, it takes money to get there. So again, I want to be I want to change the game, so I'm going to be a player in it. And if I have to raise some money to do so, then that's what we're going to do.
To be a player, you have to play the game. There's this cliche in crypto that just talks about this idea of like the path towards decentralization.
Right.
No cryptocurrency is going to have the decentralized launch that Bitcoin ever did. Anonymous founder, active participation, 12 years, 13 years of progression, yada, yada, yada. So since every succeeding product or cryptocurrency can't have that level of attainment of decentralization, they're never going to be as decentralization, but they introduce this idea of like the path to decentralization, which is basically giving the nod of like, yes, we're aware that we're not at that level, but we hope to get to that level someday. And we're setting out these X goals and principles and levels of achievement to make sure that we get there. But it's also the acknowledgement of the same thing, is that in order to be a player, you have to play the game first.
Yeah, for sure. That's the key. I mean, again, it's a dirty game, but I think how we fix it is by more choice, right? Opening up, which is, what Andrew Yang is trying to do, which is what the Libertarian Party is trying to do. Break the current duopoly broken system, right? We know the system's broken, so how do you fix it? And the answer to most things, and parlays into the decentralization thing, is, more choice. Open the market. More competition, more choice, more opportunity. Once you start to do that, you start to see change, right? The system isn't controlled by one or two individuals or one or two parties or one or two companies. Right now the Republicans and Democrats have a monopoly on the system, and we've got to break that. And
they're working behind with each other more than we want to think about. And they actually agree on a lot more things than they disagree with. They just... They hyperinflate those disagreements and they put them on TV to then create heavily partisan engagement on both sides. And that's where it comes with fear mongering and discontent and revolution and yada, yada, yada. So we know exactly where all of this is going. But yeah, Brandon, I appreciate you for coming on. It's a very open conversation. For those that are listening and watching, where do they follow you on social media? Explain to us, even if it is redundant, of how to vote for you, if they've really liked what you've said, or how to get in touch with you as well. Yeah, the November ballot, so it's November 8th of this year, is going to have my name on all the ballots. So, Brandon Davis is the name. You can find the website at electbrandondavis.com. Got all the information about, some of the things that we're looking to do, ways to, get involved, to donate. We're building a team right now. We've got a Slack channel organization set up and sliding people into different channels to be able to get them motivated, get them, all the assets and resources they need to go out into their communities and talk to their neighbors and friends and family about what we're doing and what the campaign has got going on. So if anybody is interested in getting involved and wants to help that way, that's great. We do have a event, and I know this is going to be up for a while, but I'll just say now on June 18th here in Las Vegas. So we're excited about that. That information is on the website as well. On all social media, at bdavis, 4 in Liberty. So you can find that and be a part of the conversation there. And how do they get in touch with the Libertarian Party in Nevada?
Yeah, lpnevada.org is the website for that, and they're active on all social media as well.
Very exciting. I'm definitely going to have to do a little bit more research, but we share a lot of the same principles, a lot of the same ideas. I wish you best of luck out in the election. I know we're going to be in touch a lot more here in the future. Share a lot of same networks and groups and philosophies. So thank you again for coming on, and all of you that made it this far, thank you for listening, watching. We'll catch you next time.